Edward Brooke, a very famous British politician and a philosopher, once said, "A political system which denies legitimacy to the majority of those it governs will eventually face that majority's rejection of the system itself." Insofar as Pakistan is concerned, that majority happens to be the Gen Z. According to the World Bank's recent report on Pakistan's youth inclusion, it says that half of Pakistan's population is under the age of 25. More specifically, 68% of Pakistan's population is under the age of 30. This means that if the demands of this group are not met, namely employment opportunities, as Mohsen Naqvi very recently in a speech indicated at, then they are going to reject the system itself, and since they are in the majority, the results are going to be catastrophic. Exactly this has played out with regard to Cockroach Janata Party's agitation in India as to lack of merit and rampant corruption. Now, in my opinion, no person better than John Maynard Keynes is up to the task when it comes to tackling the issue of unemployment. Because for those of you who don't know, he was able to single-handedly rescue Britain's post-World War II economy, because at that point in time, Britain's debt was 250 times of its GDP. In his book, The General Theory of Employment, Interest and Money, John Maynard Keynes says that in such a scenario, especially when the purchasing power of people has dropped, that is, people are unemployed and businesses are closing, the government ought to take more debt and then invest that debt in the economy by creating more job opportunities, such as by creating infrastructure in the form of buildings, bridges, etc., setting up hospitals, industries, and AI data centers, if you take an example. And then that is going to offer jobs not only to the working class, but also to the middle class. And since they have jobs, since they are employed, they are going to have money. And businesses are going to realize this, that if they invest in this country and produce whatever goods, that could be cars, electronics, or agricultural products, since people have money, they will be able to buy those products. And since, as a result, they will be able to make profits. And that is how you are able to revive the economy of a country, by ensuring circulation of money. Now let's apply that to Pakistan. The trouble with Pakistan is that it cannot get debt from commercial sectors such as HBL or Mizan, because if it will, then that is simply going to increase the demand of loans. And if that will happen, then those banks are going to charge more interest on the same loans that it was giving. This means that any average businessman who wanted to open a restaurant or a shoe business now will have a greater difficulty when it comes to getting loans, because he would have to pay an extra interest, and as a result he will be less likely to open up a business, and that is simply going to harm our goal of making more jobs. But if Pakistan relies on international actors, the trouble with that is international actors such as other countries charge a great deal of interest. So Pakistan turns to institutions such as the IMF, and the trouble with them is that they say that Pakistan faces not only the issue of lack of purchasing power of people, that is, people not having money, but also of inflation. This is to say that if Pakistan is going to pump its economy with money, then that is simply going to make inflation worse, because it's going to devalue its currency more, because there's going to be more money in the system. And they also say that the system in itself is unsustainable. Pakistan cannot keep relying on debt, because then investors fear that this debt bubble might rupture one day. So the advice of IMF is one of austerity, in which it tells the government to cut all forms of spending, or most forms of spending, into the economy. And that is exactly at odds with what John Maynard Keynes says. But even for the sake of argument, if one says that Pakistani government is able to get debt without raising interest rates that harms commercial businesses, or has to undertake austerity because of IMF obligations, even in that case, the trouble is, the reason that John Maynard Keynes' analysis worked in Britain and cannot work in Pakistan is that Britain at that time had industries. The only problem was that those industries were cold. Because people didn't have money, those industries were not functioning. The trouble with Pakistan is, industries in a meaningful sense do not really exist. So whatever money Pakistan is going to pour into its economy is going to be spent not on creating stuff, but on consumption, especially in the form of imports. For instance, if you take an example of Pakistan's fiscal year 2024-2025, Pakistan's exports were only $40 billion, around $40 billion, and its imports were $78 billion. This created a deficit of $38 billion. So that money is going to be spent on imports, and when it's going to create a deficit in the form of dollars, now Pakistani economy is going to suffer, because Pakistanis are going to need more dollars to do trade with other countries, and also to purchase oil and to purchase weapons. And when that will happen, more Pakistani rupee is going to be in the system, and there is going going to be an increased demand of dollar, and as a result, Pakistani currency is going to devalue. And when it will devalue, the trouble will be for the emerging entrepreneur or other new businesses that are trying to diversify Pakistan's economy, because traditionally Pakistan has relied on the colonial sources, which were one of textiles, such as providing raw cotton to the countries. But if it wants to learn from the examples of Singapore or South Korea and wants to turn to manufacturing of automobiles, electric vehicles, or integrated circuits, it cannot produce this raw material itself. It relies on foreign countries. And if the purchasing power of rupee drops, that is, if the currency devalues, now they need to spend a great amount of Pakistani rupee to get the same thing which they were previously getting, and that directly harms them, their production. And when production supply is much difficult to get, then the prices of the products that these new emerging companies are going to soar, and as a result, people are not going to buy them. And when people will not be able to buy them, they will either do two things: they will either produce less products, that is going to cause inflation, or they are going to simply lay people off and go bust. So if you see this in this slide, it becomes very clear that in Pakistan, the analysis of John Maynard Keynes cannot function to the same sense as it did in other parts of the world, because Pakistan faces not only the issue of stagnation that John Maynard Keynes tries to tackle, but at the same time it faces the issue of inflation and also supply chain disruption. It simply does not have its own industry. So that's it, and that explains whether John Maynard Keynes' analysis can help revive Pakistan's economy, and the answer is, to a very great degree, no.